Welcome to Reinventing the Wheel, a series from Garland magazine to support the development of a knowledge house for craft. And I acknowledge some of our steering committee members who are here now, such as Ben, of course, Barb and Kolakesa, Laila, Ezra, who's turned up very early in the morning in Boston. And I think Linda is here as well. But I'd like to begin by paying tribute to Mari Funaki, the jeweler and gallerist who helped foster a creative scene in our part of the world. She would have turned 70 today. We've been without her for more than 10 years, but she's fondly remembered by many of us. The Western model of craft features a studio where an individual specialist creates original works. The studio model has been extraordinarily productive in the 20th century. It's given us wonderful exhibitions of objects produced by new combinations of material and techniques and meanings that help us see the world differently. But the 21st century has seen other stories of craft emerge, or perhaps better, re-emerge, that have come from spaces outside the studio and gallery. The groundbreaking project Crafting Aotearoa helped broaden the field to include customary objects such as the Fijian Masi bark cloth that is exchanged in marriage. Building on this, the Stori series, which was a life-saving escape from lockdown from those of us on this side of the Tasman at least, brought together knowledge keepers from across Moana Oceania, some of whom are with us today, to share how they met the challenge of sustaining material cultural heritage. Now, before we begin, it's our custom to solicit a salutation from someone previously who shared with us one of these stories. And so I'd like to call on Laila El-Hamad, who last time gave us a wonderful introduction to the power of scent in Arab culture. Laila.
Thank you, Kevin. So I will, my salutation is in Arabic. It's very short, and I'll first read it in Arabic and then I'll explain it. يا مرحبا ترحيبة البدو لسهيل وإعداد ما هبت سحايب مطرها. يا مرحبا يا ريح الورد والهيل لهبت النسمة وطاير عطرها. I welcome you as the Bedouins welcome the Suhail star, which brings with it the promise of rain. I welcome the whiff of rose and cardamom that the breeze has brought to me. Thank you.
That's very beautiful. Thank you, Laila. And I'm sure those with us from Moana Oceania will appreciate the importance of those floral scents. So we're fortunate today to hear from the founders of Lagi Mama, the association responsible for Stori. And please excuse me if I stumble over my pronunciation. Kolakesa Uafa Mahina Dwai is of Tongan heritage from the villages of Tataka Motonga in Tongatapu and Tefisi in Vavahu. She worked as a curator at Te Papa and the Auckland War Memorial Museum, from where she helped develop Crafting Aotearoa. Toluma Anave, Barbara Makawati Afitu, is of Samoan heritage. She also worked at Auckland War Memorial Museum as community engagement facilitator and then the Arts Foundation of New Zealand. Their journey is a long one, but it is only beginning. Today's talanoa, or conversation, or yarn, is a precious opportunity to consider how this journey might extend beyond Moana Oceania and inform those of us in other lands who are seeking to value the stories in their objects. We're very grateful that you've made the time to share your learnings with us, Kolakesa and Barbara. Welcome.
Tulo mo pulotu langi mo mama. tulo mo kamataanga, tulo mo mana whenua, tulo mo moana whenua, tulo mo tala kotoa, ka ata ke mato'o whatongia, ho mangafa ko wahea. We salute Pulotu Lange Mama. We salute our sacred beginnings. We salute mana whenua, tangata whenua, Indigenous lands and peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. We salute Moana Oceania, Indigenous lands and peoples of the wider Moana Oceania. We salute all sacred knowledges, and may we be allowed to take responsibility of the tasks we are allocated today and share with you through our talanoa. Se oto ofa, talofa lava, kia ora koutou katoa, and greetings to you all on this platform. My name is Kolokesa Wafamahina Tuai, and I am one part of a growing team of Langimama Academy and Consultancy. And I'll tag you, Tolu Ma'anave, to introduce yourself, and then we can keep going.
Mahalo lavale soifua. I'm Barbara. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so we've got a slide show on right now, and hoping that you all can see it. And just a FYI in advance that we do come with good intentions to stick to time. But if we go over time, I hope you all don't mind, but we'll try and keep within the time that we've allocated. And thank you to all of you who navigated this evening's journey to actually land on the right platform. So as Kevin said, our talk today is going to be around navigating craft in Moana Oceania, starting from crafting Aotearoa to Talk Story Tuesdays. So Langimama Academy and Consultancy. Langimama, I think for us and the work that we do is pretty much founded with the name that we were gifted. And this name was gifted to us by Hufangahea Lotu, Professor Agustino Mahina. We're just over 2 years old, so we formally set up as Langimama in August 2018. And together with the gifting of the name, we were given an essay. So that was our foundation that informed and still does inform what we're doing. So Langi, there's a whole lot of meanings behind it, but as you can see on your screen, Langi is symbolic for Samoa, and it really acknowledges the lineage of Tolu Ma'anave, Barbara Makuati Awhitu is of Samoan heritage, and Mama symbolically references Tonga, and there is a third component, which is Pulotu, and it symbolically references Fiji. So other meaning to that is that Langi also references the future, Mama references the present, and Pulotu, Fiji, represents the past. So all the other meanings that go with that is that Langi also literally means sky, but make references to the sacred, divine, and refined. And Mama literally means light and make references to earth, world, knowledge. And Pulotu, the third component, which is not part of our name, but is very much part of everything that we do, references our ancestral homeland and afterward, particularly for those from Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji. And this is drawn from our Tongan oral history. So we've been asked many times to say in one sentence succinctly how to describe what we do. And it's just taken us over 2 years to come up with something that has, we feel, that is near, enough to capture some of the things that we've been doing. So basically, we mediate at the intersection of Indigenous communities and institutional settings to create a safer time space by embedding different ways of knowing, seeing, doing, and being. Okay, so tag Tolu Ma'anave.
So I'm not a very good driver and talker, but so this is part of our team, and the very good-looking gentleman on the right is our ulumatua, our tula, our number one, hufanga, who not only gifted us this very important name, but he has also been a huge light, a guiding light for everything that we've done. And just here in the lovely blue dress is another part of our team. So we originally started with just Kologesa and I, and we now have, and we are growing, which is fantastic. So Langi Mama was really born only 28 months ago, but you would never believe it with some of the wonderful things that we've had. So we're just going to touch on a few chapters in the journey, I think, just to give you a bit of sense of where we've gone and where we've been lucky enough to travel. But for today, we will just concentrate on a couple of our projects. So we met at Tamaki Pangahira at Auckland War Memorial Museum. We've done some incredible work with our Cambodian community, which was a beautiful project called Alive, which honoured 12 of our Cambodian Tamaki based families here. We've been very, very blessed to work with the incredible team at Melbourne Museum as part of the Te Pasifika team. So it's great to see Jade and some of the team here tonight. We did a stint at the Arts Foundation, and we've done a lot of work in other places, including a lot of institutions, but always key and first and foremost, and at the centre of everything we do has always been our communities.
Okay, so we're going to kickstart off with crafting Aotearoa, and I'll let you know when we go to the next one, B. We'll just stick with the first one. Thank you. So I'm just going to give you some background into the everything that was involved in producing this mammoth book, and then I'll go into touch on some key insights, because there were three of us. You can see on that image there was Dr. Damien Skinner, Carl Chitham, and myself that involved as the three authors, but there were many other voices. So this book project began with a gathering in December 2012 with Dr. Damien Skinner. And within the time and space of close to 7 years, there have been many people and institutions that we have engaged, involved, and contributed to the journey of the book until it was launched in November last year. So it truly involved the hearts and minds of a local, national, and global village. And both Carl and I officially joined the project in 2014. So Damien, held it for 7 years, and Carl and I joined and was involved for the last 5 years. So in 2016, there were 4 workshops with overseas craft experts, and a lot of you on this platform would know, and maybe some of these people will be on here as well, I'm not sure. We had Tanya Harrod from the UK, we had Ruth Phillips from Canada, we had Namita Wiggers, and we had Monica Gaspar. So these experts came and brought their knowledge and expertise from the different places they're at and shared it with some of the team and people here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And in 2016, there was also a talanoa held at Tamaki Pangahira, Auckland War Memorial Museum, to discuss the proposed use of the term Moana instead of Pacific. And this talanoa was important for gauging some critical feedback on our initial proposal of just using Moana. And I just want to acknowledge here Julia Mangi-Al-Gray of Makeo in PNG Heritage, who expressed within that group of thinkers and doers that we had that Moana was not a term that was meaningful to her as someone of PNG heritage. So we noted that, and just want to also acknowledge Hufanga Molotu Professor Agustino Mahina, who is on this platform this evening, for further critical discussions that led to our decision to use Moana Oceania, and I'll go into a little bit of detail with that later. But we also held a focus group that was led by Carl Chitham, held in Rotorua in 2017, and that was to give input around the Māori content of the book. And at different points in writing of the book, we called on the expert feedback of a number of individuals and groups who provided insights, provocations, and suggestions about the approach and content. And we got the good and bad, and we took it all in, and that helped us refine what we ended up with this publication. And a key person, just want to acknowledge, is Rigel Solzano, who was a key researcher that helped us with researching all the topics that's discussed in the book. And just really want to acknowledge that there are 60 contributors. So apart from myself, Damien, and Carl, who wrote the body of the book, we had 60 authors who came with their knowledge and expertise, and they provided a little sidebar of about 800 words that's inserted from the beginning of the book right through to the end. So that just provides the rich and the diverse voices within this book. So I'll go on to the next slide, please. So Damien gave us the name Mahina Ham. So that's what we called ourselves. And that was made up of our 3 last names, combining parts of our 3 last names. And this is just to show examples of our journey, our 5-year journey, which, you know, had its ups and downs, but involved some seriousness, hardcore thinking, some food and laughter, ice cream at the top, but also we went to different places, you know, in Aotearoa, where we could really, the 3 of us, bring our thinking and feeling and doing together to produce this book, as well as everyone else that came on board. But I think, what is the uniqueness of this book? I thought that it'll be good for those of you that have read the book. I apologize, but because this book was written by the 3 of us, there is like a key part in our introduction that I feel would be really important, because it does capture our 3 voices in the one, and it gives you a wider context of what the book is all about, but also will give you some insights into what will lead us to our talk later on. So this is actually part of our introduction, and I'm going to read it, and it says, I'm starting now. But craft is a tricky term in Aotearoa. Why should a history of making give pride of place to Pākehā objects and practices? How could you write a book in Aotearoa that didn't pay proper attention to the history of toi Māori, the oldest and most distinct type of handmaking in this country? Craft is political, and not just in terms of who and what gets included. There is a long history of craft and related terms to suppress cultural activities. After all, to replace Indigenous words with Pākehā ones like handicraft or curio is a way of denying the Indigenous knowledge that is held in a specific name, and to relegate Indigenous people to making craft and not art is a way to maintain the hierarchies between colonizer and the colonized. Finally, the term craft itself in Pākehā culture is being blown open, stretched and interrogated, pushing aside the usual focus on expected topics like the arts and crafts movement or studio crafts to include a much greater variety of makers and making. A new broad idea of what knowledge, practices, and objects fit into a new history of making demands a rethink of the places that are relevant to this history. Telling the story of making in Aotearoa is obviously about Māori, tangata whenua, the first peoples in this land and those whose making is Indigenous to this place. The story will also be about Pākehā, who brought many kinds of craft with them and whose craft practices have played a role in shaping new identities for Pākehā in Aotearoa. But this history also includes the knowledge, practices, and objects brought from the many other island homes of people who have settled here. This book acknowledges the ancestral connections of Aotearoa as an island nation among a sea of islands across Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the great oceans of Kiwa, guardian of the Moana. Moana Oceania makers in Aotearoa are continuing through adaptation and innovation to make the kind of works that have been brought over from their homelands. To be informed about crafting and making in Aotearoa means starting with knowledge and practices, objects and makers who live here, but it quickly leads to other islands. These stories can't properly be told without talking about what happened long ago, as well as more recently. And why Moana Oceania rather than the Pacific, the more common name for this part of the world? That name Pacific was given to this region by a Portuguese navigator and explorer in 1521, Ferdinand Magellan's Mar Pacifico, my apologies for the pronunciation if that didn't hit right, the peaceful sea. emphasizes a narrow perception of the peoples and places of Moana Oceania as peaceful, tranquil, passive, which is not how indigenous peoples from this region see themselves. Pacific has become Pacifica, Pacifica, or Pasifiki, but these transliterations are derived from the same root. Moana means ocean in the Māori language and in other island nations such as the Cook Islands, Hawaii, Samoa, and Tonga. While it can never be truly inclusive because of the diversity of languages and cultures of Moana Oceania peoples, it has meaning and relevance to this place. Oceania is another foreign name that was first used in the early 19th century. Today, it is a popular alternative for Pacific because it suggests a sea of islands connected to each other rather than isolated islands in a far sea. It is a name that is more meaningful to island nations that do not have the word Moana in their languages. Together, Moana Oceania empowers and privileges Indigenous perspectives. It embodies a worldview that is strongly connected to Aotearoa, but has its roots in the wider region. Rounding up now, crafting Aotearoa, a cultural history of making in New Zealand and the wider Moana Oceania, is a version of this new history, one where Māori, Pākehā, and Moana Oceania knowledge and practices are placed alongside each other, and the connections, similarities, nuances, and differences are given due weight. For a long time, these various trajectories of making have been discussed separately. This book draws them together into a dynamic conversation with each other. Different knowledges and histories of making are acknowledged, highlighting the multifarious ways objects are described and used by communities living in the same time and place. The many interactions and intersections between Māori, Pākehā, and wider Moana Oceania makers come into view, and this is central to what this book sets out to achieve. Making, whatever term you use to describe it, has been crucial in establishing the conditions that have helped build the multicultural nation of Aotearoa. Craft is at the heart of the story. So I'll go on to the uniqueness. That I think I just felt comfortable reading from that because it does speak on behalf of the three of us of Mahina Ham, but just some key things I think I want to touch on, which was my contribution as a person bringing in a Moana Oceania lens to the project. And one key thing really was doing away with imposed terminologies. So with Pacific, we used Moana Oceania, and we had other terms like Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, and even Lapita. And these were looked at critically in the contribution by Hufanga Professor Agustino Mahina in his sidebar. So you've got, Melanesia, that means islands of dark-skinned people, and this is driven by race and geography, why they were given that name. And you had Polynesia, meaning many islands, and Micronesia, meaning small islands, both driven by size and geography. So Lapita was the same thing, which is the name of a place in New Caledonia where fragments of highly decorated, elaborate, and beautiful pottery were found and are associated with our original Moana Oceania peoples. What is problematic is that this name Lapita is then used to describe not only these distinctive pottery, but also the peoples that made them and the lands that our ancestors come from. So I think that's one of the key contributions that this book makes, is that we made a call not to use these terms and we stuck to it. And I think that's the only way we can go about making change, because you can change mindset, but it's also the terminologies that you use, and particularly in publications where you publish things and it'll be regurgitated and referenced. So if we do away with those problematic and imposed terms and come up with our own terms, that may not be the right one, but it's for that particular time and space, is reflective of the diversity and the different voices, then we should do it. And I think another one is the word traditional. Where does traditional start and where does it end? So maybe simple things, but those are some of the things that we really looked at in this book and we just didn't use it. And I'm not sure for those that have gone through the book, Moana Oceania as a term, like Pacific, is inclusive of Māori, because Aotearoa is an island nation. So when we're here and we're talking about Aotearoa and Aotearoa as our foundation, we are, it does make sense, and it is appropriate that they are distinguished because they are the indigenous peoples of this land. Hence why you'll notice in the book that we say Waira Moana Oceania, so Māori and Waira Moana Oceania. So adding the Waira acknowledges that. So it's a little addition, but things like that and the wording is really crucial in publications like this. And the other point is we've got 60 contributors, and our key aim as Mahina Ham was we were going to allow each of those contributors to have their own unique voice. So however way they wanted to share their knowledge and expertise, and in whatever language, because some of them use Pacific and some of them use traditional, and some of them use Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, and even Lapita, we did not touch their words. We only made sure that just with our content, we were consistent and we didn't use those terminologies. And the other key thing just want to mention is within this book, we've got 13 Moana Oceania languages. 5 of those languages, we brought in language experts to make sure that we had the right translation, but also we had the right diacritical marks, you know, whether we were using macrons and glottals. So they were really significant. And that was a major part of the book that we actually only acknowledged and did towards the end of the project. And the other unique aspect also is that whenever we talked about a practice from a particular area, we privileged their language and we privilege the terminologies that they use to describe their making practices, but also their makers and their practitioners. So rather saying they're an artist, but if they're called a tufunga, then we'll use tufunga instead of artist. And for those of you that have seen the book, we've tried to make it easier for the readers by putting the glossary at the end of each page, which had some of those terminology, because we didn't gloss in the text, because that was our way of saying, well, you've got to familiarize yourselves, your vocabulary with our language, because that's part and parcel of educating and informing, but also we'll make it easy for you because we'll have the meaning at the bottom of that page so you don't have to turn to the end of the book. Okay, I'll go to the next slide, B. So this is just one of many examples. Guess if one key thing to take away from this book is we wanted to, you know, with crafting Aotearoa, is that we wanted to make a point that it is multicultural, it's multifaceted, multi-perspective, multimedia, handmade as well as human-made, because we've got craft practices that are oratory. You know, it's not something that's made by hand, it's made by the mind and it's spoken by, you know, your voice. So we expanded, as I touched on in that bit in the introduction. And one of the key also, we wanted to share the unknown stories. And this is just one example. We've got Haruhiko Samishima, who's on the right of your screen together with my 2 daughters. So him together with Mark Adams were Studio Lagonda, and they did the photography for the book. But Haruhiko is well known here in Aotearoa, possibly overseas, as someone who's photographed a lot of craft related projects. But for him, he said after he went to photograph the White Sunday, so this is called Whakame, and it's White Sunday, and it happens annually for Tongan Methodist churches. And this is one space, which is why we've got makers who are not known in mainstream or not known to other communities, but they have the knowledge and skills to make what you see Melisani and Nakasimi Moana wearing. And that's where creativity, innovation happens, but no one else really knows about it. So how can we bring some of those stories and inject them into this book, Crafting Aotearoa? And for Haruhiko at the end of this to say, he's lived here in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, for over 30 years, but he's never ever been to see a White Sunday, whakame, and he was just blown away by seeing this, and it was for the project. So it just gives you an insight where you've got, especially here in a place like Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, with where the majority, 15 of the 17 identified ethnic island nations have the majority of their diaspora communities here in Aotearoa. And to have someone like Haruhiko Samishima, who's of Japanese heritage, saying he's never gained an insight into, you know, this, you know, but he's lived here for over 30 years, is telling us something. You know, how are we sharing more of those diversity within our communities that's here in Aotearoa? Okay, I think that's it. Tolu ma'anave, I'll tag you.
Keep going, Kes.
Okay, I'm going to introduce this and then I'm going to tag Tolu ma'anave. So all of this, Crafting Aotearoa book, and the work that was done and everyone that contributed really has shaped and has influenced the way our ways of knowing, seeing and doing in other projects that have come after Crafting Aotearoa. And this is one of them, the Arts of Moana Oceania. And we know some of you who are on this platform have been part of those that have joined us and you know, and listened to the amazingness that's been gifted by our holders of knowledge. But this project really started out as a research scoping project, and it came out of a conversation that Tolu ma'anave and I had with Alison Taylor, who is the CEO of a Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland-based organization called Te Taumata Toia Iwi. So this organization, they're all about supporting creativity, culture, and the arts, you know, but regional, just within the Tāmaki Makaurau area. So we're having a conversation, and she was interested in getting Langimama, Tolu ma'anave and I to be part of this advocacy group, which she was trying to kind of bring together around, you know, people from the cultural sector to advocate on the value of art and its contribution to well-being. So our question to her was, whose definition of art are you using to advocate with? We already knew the answer, but then we gave her some stats. We said, yeah, like it said on there, all of this is on Te Taumata Toia Iwi's website, so we can send links for you to go and take it all in, for those of you that haven't been part of it and don't know that it's there. But yeah, basically we threw her with some stats and said, do you know that there's, you know, there's 17 identified ethnic island nations with diaspora communities here in Aotearoa, and 15 of them have the majority of their population here in Tāmaki Makaurau. And if you were to know and understand their, you know, their knowledge and understanding of what art is, then you can genuinely, you know, advocate on their behalf. Because at the moment, you don't know, and you won't be able, you know, you can't say that you are advocating on their behalf when you don't know. So that started our journey. We wrote a research paper, started end of January, went to the end of May where we submitted it, and we reached out to all 17 using our networks, and 9 came back within the deadline that we had. And those are the 9 that we have here. And I'll tag you, Tolu ma'anave.
Is Michael Mal on? Kevin?
I can't see him here.
Okay, all good. Thank you. So yes, so it was, I don't think we had any idea what this project was going to look like or be. So we invited those that had, you know, around providing a paper, but what became very, very evident was we had to create a platform for them to speak to it. And the speaking to it, I think, just became this beautiful blessing, I think, for not only us, but for all those that shared, but for all of those that were able to join and listen from across the, I won't even say across the Moana, but, you know, across the globe. So Michael Mal was our first. And we won't go into it because I'm mindful of time, but we will send out the link to those that are interested. But just to hear from Michael, you know, and right from the start, he said, I'm not going to give you, I cannot give you a PNG, you know, lens on what art is. I can give you, you know, from me, who is from the Moge, you know. And so what he shared was just, you know, incredible, but also so educational to all of those that were on the platform, as well as, you know, those who have been, you know, who have gone on to the paper as well. From PNG, we went to the Rock. This was where we got Zoom bombed. But, you know, our Niueans were fantastic because they actually said that no one has ever asked them, you know, what art is from their lens, from their Niuean lens, but then for them to have that conversation around what that looks like. So this is something that they gifted us. Sorry, I'm just going to go through it quickly, but feel free to go online. And then we went to the beautiful Dr. Kabini Sanga. And this was through a talanoa that we had over coffee, which we kind of recorded, and then we created this paper, which he blessed us with. So once you've got the blessing from him, then it was fantastic. But even his lens was just really, really beautiful. But, you know, Dr. Kabini, like many others, have been writing for decades, you know, on so many other things. And because his area is specifically in education, so much of that for us as Moana Oceania, that whole holistic understanding. And so everything that he was, you know, everything that he shared in the past had so much relevance within this as well. So,
and I'll just add, yes. Can I just add something to Manavi? What we found was really great with the fact that we had Dr. Kabini Sanga, and then we had Dr. Michael Mal. Those two, Solomon Islands and PNG, are the minority groups here in Aotearoa, but they are so diverse, you know, the diverse nations in our community. So to have them come in and strongly say, like with Michael Mal, there is no such thing as a PNG worldview on what art is, but I can tell you from my perspective as someone from Mogai, and the same thing with Kabini, where he goes, you know, he did talk generally, but then he said, I'm from Malaita, and Malaita has, trying to remember the key stats, Malaita has, 12 linguistic groups, and he has, you know, he comes from one of those linguistic groups which has 7 tribes, and even then there's diversity in terms of the languages. So how do we capture that diversity? How do we make sure that we consider that and not just lump all of us in as if we have one mind, one way of knowing, one way of seeing, one way of doing? And to have them there, like with, you know, with Solomon Islands with over 80 languages, be part of this 9 is really crucial, you know, just so we can say, hey, this is what we mean. This is what we mean by diversity. Okay, you go, B.
And so we went to the beautiful Dr. Tadisi Vunidilo for Fiji, and in typical Tadisi style, when we asked for a couple of pages, she came back with 47 pages as a true, you know, Fijian, proud Fijian. But and you can read here, you know, Tadisi's had, you know, she's been a curator, she's worked at Te Papa, you know, she's done so many different roles, but her lens, you know, and just speaking to this on, you know, from an Italki lens was just so important. And I think one of the big things, one of her big learnings, she actually gave us homework when she was doing her turn. But one of the biggest things for her was, you know, we need to ensure that we're building more of these platforms so that all of our young ones from across the globe can actually join into these talanoas. From the beautiful Fiji, we went to Kiribati, and these 2 mamas, Gaitaita and Luisa, they were the first ones that we actually went to. So we rocked up to their whale, which is, you know, a couple of hours outside of Auckland. And as soon as we said to them, you know, what is art? You know, they both looked at us like, oh, and then straight away they were kind of, you know, trying to put it into the Western frame of what art is here. And then Kessa said, no, and go take away everything you explained to us as makers. And combined, I think we worked out they had about 110 years between them worth of, you know, making, and, you know, the just such dear hearts here, especially in Aotearoa. And they said, and we don't have such a word. There is no such word as art in Kiribati. We have te rapaka, which means knowledge. You know, so all of these learnings just came very quickly and early. Kes, you can go to Rotuman.
Okay, so Rotuma, we had Fesaitu Solomone, and I think Fesaitu is on here. I hope. I saw her name pop up, but yeah, Fesaitu also, because we said this is just the high level research, this is not a deep dive, we just want a sentence. But I think Fesaitu felt pressured when she heard that the Fijian had 44 pages, so she came back and gifted the project with some more words. But you know, this was quite a beautiful share with Fesaitu, where she really talked from her area of knowledge and expertise, and it had to do with the Rotuman language, but also through her mother's lineage, the art of healing, you know. So she gave some real deep insights into that, and yeah, and just continuously, like with everyone else, expanded our understanding of why it's important to always look from the lens of the communities that you're working with and take into consideration their understanding of arts, which is the same. You can apply it to crafts, because with everyone that we approached, it was art was left on the side, and also it was interconnected to everything else. So they always talked about culture and provided a very holistic sharing. So from there we went to, I'll let you do this one, Toluma Nave.
So from there we went to Hawaii, and we can lovingly say that we stalked Dr. Manulani Aluli Maya, because she has done so much work around Hawaiian epistemology. We just wanted to connect with her, and we were gifted on that session. She actually brought her two sisters who work in the art space, and their mother was, you know, had actually done the first Hawaiian gallery. Is that right, Kes? So, you know, so it's in their blood. And so, you know, their share was incredible. And we will make a lot of these talk stories available one day soon. And we've got the amazing Hufanga here, so maybe he would like to share.
Don't worry.
So we went from Hawaii, we went to Tonga. Whangaheako Lotu, did you want to add something here, or no? We just keep going? Okay, so, you know, we started out with just Whangaheako Lotu, and with everything that we did, we were open and flexible, and Whangaheako Lotu brought on board Maui Tawaheako Professor Devita Ka'ili, and also Ba'uto Vavaulahi Adriana Leah. So there was 3 of them, and what they gifted was they looked at the Maui Tawaheako, talked to the ancestors of Tongan arts, and then Whangaheako Lotu and Ba'uto Vavaulahi gave us an insight into Sio Whakatonga ai Ati Whakatonga, Tongan views of Tongan arts. And again, their paper is available on Te Taumata Toea Iwi's website. So you can all go in and get a little bit more sort of insights into these, but just, yeah, that was Tonga. You can finish off the...
And then we actually had this conversation with the incredible Mama Mary Ama at the start of COVID, and unfortunately she wasn't well, but she directed, as she does, from her sick bed, and got her girls to represent, and what they actually shared was around IPUKAREA, which is the everything. You know, as a Cook Islander, you know, as a, so yeah. So this is just quickly the stats. This is how far and wide we went, and just how blessed we were that so many people joined this platform, you know, and just hoping that it continues in other parts. But we do have another 9 islands to go, which hopefully will be, you know, one of the things that we will do in 2021.
Okay, so just to touch on this, one of the things that, the key things that we do as Langi Mama Academy and Consultancy is not only to bring the knowledge, which is there within our communities, as you can see with the 9 that gifted through Arts of Moana Oceania, and as we know as part of living communities, bring it to, together where how can it inform the cultural space, especially cultural institutions. And with the work that we did with Tamaki Pangahira Auckland War Memorial Museum and Toyo Tamaki Auckland Art Gallery, these cultural institutions have collections management software that these institutions use to manage their collections. And so both Tamaki Pangahira and Toyo Tamaki use the Vernon system. So we had trialed, before we did the Arts of Moana Oceania project, we kind of kickstarted off a trial at Toyo Tamaki Auckland Art Gallery, where they wanted us, we did the project, Langi Mama worked with them to apply an Indigenous Tongan lens to what art is, but using John Webber's prints. And he was the artist that traveled with Captain Cook on his voyage. And we had Hufanga Heako Molotu, Professor Agustino Mahina, come in and provide an Indigenous lens on those images. There are 37 images in total from Webber's prints that Webber's work from the region, and 16 of those images are from Tonga. So Hufanga Heako Molotu applied a Tongan lens to those Tongan works. But what we wanted to do as well is how could we then have that, apply that Tongan lens to the collections management system, the Vernon system. So we didn't quite round that up, but we were advised that we should just go directly to the CEO of Vernon Systems because he lives here in Aotearoa in Sandringham. And so we're like, wow, that's a great idea. Just go directly to the source. And that's what we did. So on this picture, you've got Paul Rowe, who's the CEO of Vernon, and you've got Lisa, who is part of the team. And we've had several conversations where we've finally landed. And I think that's the thing within some of these institutions, it takes a lot to shift the thinking, the mindset, because they're so used to doing it in a certain way and in a very Western way. So after a long, how many meetings, AB, they finally clicked and they said, oh, is this what we mean? And we said, yes. When you open up Vernon, boom, you just come to a Tongan lens of what art is, and you don't just use a terminologies. That's not that, just, and he goes, yeah, well, this is something that we've actually done with the botany collection at Tamaki Pangahira. So we're going to trial it with the Tongan lens and the work that Hufanga Heako Molotu started with the Webber collection. And so what we did, we're in that process. It's a work in process where Paul and the team have come with a budget as to what that'll look like. And we're just waiting for someone to fund it. So if anyone out there is interested in funding what's going to be a groundbreaking project, please let us know. So that's where we're at with that. But the key point is we've got to influence the tools, because these are the tools. We can change the mindset and maybe embed it in policies. But if the tools that are used to classify, categorize, and collect the information of our collections held in these institutions are still in a, very much structured in a very Western way, then of course that change is not going to happen. So we need to infiltrate the tools as well, and that's what we're doing with Vernon.
Kevin, I'm just mindful of the time. Did you want us to stop there?
How much longer do you have?
Oh, we could go for hours, Kevin.
I'm sure, yes. How many slides have you got left?
We've got another, we'll quickly go through another 3 and then that's it.
Sure.
Let's talk about also,
Yeah, I think if anything, if you go back to the Mamas B, I think we wanted to bring this example of Gaitaita Watson and Louisa Humphreys. So they were the 2 mamas that gifted us the Kiribati lens of what art is, but they're also, like B said, between the 2 of them, over 100 years of knowledge and practice in terms of the making practices as weavers. And they've just created, they were commissioned by Douse Art Museum here in Wellington to create this work, Osendai. You can go to that one there. And we are in the process of having a conversation with Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa for them to acquire this into their collections. That's part of what Langimama does as well, is we know the gaps in some of these institutions. So we love to just, lovingly say, hey, we know you have a gap in your collection and works like this will fill that gap. So that's what we did. That was our pitch to Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa, and they took it on. So it's still in the process, it hasn't been approved, but we put in a pitch. But why we wanted to bring this up was that this is why it's important that institutions know the different ways of what art is from the different lens, because we can tell you right now, it's a battle what we're going through, because we've had to try and justify and validate, not only these two women and their making practices, but the Kiribati way of knowing and understanding what art is, and to an institution that's very much Western in their ways and have never encountered, because this is a work that is brokering new ground for these two makers. But can honestly say that if this institution, if Te Papa Museum had the knowledge and understanding of the Kiribati lens of what art is, then this battle that we're having will be easier. It won't even be a battle. They'd know and accept it. So this is just to illustrate why institutions like museums and galleries really need to have this knowledge. Otherwise, there's no such thing as decolonization when you don't have the knowledge embedded within your institution. So, yeah.
Can you please tell us a little bit about this artwork?
Oh, yes. Sorry, thank you, Hufangahea Komolotu. So what we did with these two mamas, there was an exhibition called Amua, oh my gosh, Amua, New Lineages of Making. And it was co-curated by myself and Carl Chitham. And this is actually was part and parcel of linked to the Crafting Aotearoa book. So Kevin wrote a review on it, is on Garland, and there's some more information that's been out, and we can share that for those that are interested. But what we did with these two mamas is this was commissioned specifically for that show. And with these two mamas, a lot of what they do, they don't go out there and say, hey, my work is all about climate change and trying to counter climate change. For them, their making is, they've brought these making practices, adapted it here to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and are hugely, hugely big in passing that on to the younger generation. So that's their way of countering climate change, where if this knowledge, I need to share this knowledge to my kids and my grandkids, because that's how we can carry our culture with us. And for these two mamas, as weavers, they still make today, and they experiment with new materials, their Kiribati dance costumes, but also they've been involved with another group on reviving the making of their Kiribati armor. For those of you that don't know what it looks like, Google it, and it's, you've got some of the museums who have those armors on their collections online, but it's a huge project. So what we said to them is, combining everything, that all your knowledge and skills and the things that you make, can you make a climate change warrior, a female warrior, but also move away from what you normally do. And that's why they came up. This is what they came up with. They blew us away and came up with this piece, which they made from scratch, but they used the knowledge and skills of how you would make a Kiribati skirt, and how you would make the top, a siputa, and the hat is the shape and form is of a fisherman's hat. So they've got all these elements. I think there's about 11 components that are all linked to some of the things that they make, for their Kiribati costumes, but have done it in a new and innovative way. And Osendai, the name, that was a big thing. So it means sunrise, and they said that they toed and froed, with so many names, but basically it's just to say, despite what's happening in the world, you know, especially because this was made during the pandemic and our lockdown here in Aotearoa, is that the sun will rise again. So the sunrise will always give us the hope, you know, irrespective of what's happening out in our world.
Yeah, my point is that the artwork is not climate change as such. Climate change was the inspiration of this artwork. That was the point that I would have liked you to talk about. You were beating around the bush for too long, but that was the point that I was driving at, that this artwork is not about climate change as such. The inspiration was climate change that led them to this innovation, creation, and original artwork. Anyway, you continue.
No, thank you. You've articulated it beautifully, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you, whangaheako malotu.
Thank you, Kevin. I think we'll end there, Kes?
Yes, that's a perfect way to end it.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. We've got some time now for talanoa, for discussion, but I just would like to thank you so much, Kolakesta and Barbara, for sharing this magnificent journey. And I think we've appreciated how you've allowed for difference in the cultures and through various means. And I think it was very interesting to hear you talk about crafting Aotearoa and the decision, Kolakesta, to include the glossary. And I think there are two things that are quite unique about that. One is that the glossary is on the same page. It's not something you have to go all the way back. It's a very thick book, so it's a lot of work to check every word. But also the words are repeated. So it's not as though it's presuming that you've learnt it. It's knowing that this is here to remind you to learn it again. And with the premise of to talk today about how we might extend your lens, or I should say lenses, it's a bit like your optometrists really, with so many different lenses, but methodologies that allow for that difference. And I can see this as being something that is inspirational for those of us, say, you know, in Africa and South Africa, the Zulu, Xhosa, and so on. We've got some people interested from that perspective, as well as other lands. So there's so much to learn from it. Doesn't mean we're all part of Moana Oceania, that it would be beautiful, but I think just as in the Western system, there was so much to learn from the systems in Paris and London, now it's turn for Moana Oceania to also shine a light and to see how we do things. Now I'd like to open it up to anyone who would like to ask a question or have something to comment.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I quite like the use of the word crafting as a metaphor for making. Very interesting. On the one hand, navigating, by the way, navigating as a metaphor for making. On the one hand, navigating, or navigation for that matter, is mediated at the intersection of the winds and the waves. So you have hydrodynamic and aerodynamic elements involved here, as well as social dynamic, you know, the social, cultural, and all of that. So you deal here with three intersecting entities: the winds, the waves, and the society at large. And on the other hand, making from a Tongan perspective, this is something that we forgot to talk about at our presentation. Making is mediated at the intersection of thinking and feeling. We may be treating making as something that is confined to the hands, but which is maybe correct, but then there's more to it in the sense that making is mediated at the intersection of thinking and feeling, or intersection of mind and heart. So I think we need to take that into consideration, that making cannot be dealt with in isolation from thinking and feeling, or on another level from mind and heart. So I think that's something that we need to take into account, that making or crafting or navigating cannot take place in isolation, as if it's an isolated event. It is an event that is mediated, in the case of making, at the intersection of the mind and the heart, or thinking and feeling, in the same way that navigating is mediated at the intersection of the winds and the waves. How interesting.
Yes.
So it's something that I wanted to throw in for us to think about, and especially gracious ladies of Lange Mama to continue to think about.
Thank you so much, Professor Maina. Vincent, you had something to
I did. Kasalelia Manko, Vincite, though I'm tuning in from Minneapolis at 3 in the morning.
Wow.
I wanted to continue Okusi's thoughts there around craft and making as a site. And this as an extension of how connecting craft and making also troubles the sequestering of indigenous knowledge as crafts, just crafts, you know. But to think about crafts in terms of vessels as well. So this importance of our navigation traditions and crafts. When I think about making that requires keeping materiality, process, intent, and design all together. The craft of vessels, outrigger canoes, very much foreground all of those. The crafts are material, but they're also relations, kinship relations. So they're also sites, and so across Micronesia in particular, but I'm sure this is the case elsewhere in Oceania. The crafts, the vessels themselves are at once the people and the island, the vessel and the elements. And so they morph, they have that kind of substantiating ability. And but the big point I wanted to move in here is the connection that crafts in this way in terms of making, but also as exemplified by traditional watercraft and the crafts of knowledge, the knowledge systems that's involved in that is the centrality of instrumentalized knowledge, which points directly to our own science-like traditions. And I think this is really important to mention because with the valorization of seafaring that we see in popular culture in the past 2 decades, even culminating with Disney's Moana, for example, there's a tendency, I think, to slide from seeing indigenous seafaring and technology as wayfinding as non-instrumental. There's a tendency to slide from that to an unwitting erasure of indigenous instrumentalization, which is to say our own intellectual and science histories, you know, and so this is a long way of saying crafts by way of vessels that can also be understood in terms of the complex things that are happening around in that making captures also can not only decolonize but also call attention to deeper indigenous knowledge systems, even when they are unwittingly erased by exuberant celebrations of our traditions.
Thank you so much. And I think it's certainly useful for us working on this knowledge house, where we're trying to understand material thinking, to look at it in terms of your focus on instrumentalization. I think it's something which we can look at more closely.
Yes, thank you, Vincent.
Great work, you guys.
Yeah. No, and so good to see your face. I've heard of you and, you know, seeing all your writing, especially through Hufanga Malotu. So good to see you on screen. Thank you so much for your comments. Yeah.
And Benjamin, are you still here? He had a question about the changes that you might have seen in your institutions, your institutes. What's been the highlight in terms of changes? Kolakesa, Barbara, would you like to nominate something?
Don't say that again, Kevin. I thought you were asking Ben.
No, this is a comment from Benjamin.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
What are the changes that you've seen with the institutes since you've been embarking in your journey, and you know what's been a main highlight?
What a troublemaker. What are the changes in this institutions? Let's just say, trying to think, maybe the change is that we've actually brought a different way of doing, knowing and doing by just sharing. That's been the key thing, is that we've had examples to share and direct people to and talk confidently and, you know, with. But has there, Toluma Anave, can you unmute and help me? Has there change? I think the thing is, Kevin, it's no, and maybe no, no change.
Yeah, I think you know, we were lucky enough to be part of the Pacific Collection Access Project at Tamaki Pangahira, and to open up that space for 13 of our communities to come in was, you know, and I'm so naive because I thought that this was obviously the norm, that if you had material culture and materials and objects and taonga that belonged to these peoples, that we would have the peoples alongside to keep them warm, you know, to keep them alive, but also to speak for them. So this project, I think, was really was a beginning. I think, you know, and again, that same, you know, what we were gifted, you know, and one of the sessions by our Fijians was the Fijian cultural structure and itauke structure, knowledge system. And it was really problematic because we were still trying to fit their knowledge into the Western boxes that we had, this collection management, you know, at the whale. So, you know, it's a beginning. And thank you, Ben, for that question. But there's a long, long way to go, and we have to be part of these changes. We have to be part of building these structures so that they stay and that they are genuine, so that we aren't having these conversations in 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe our experiences with the institutions, because we are working with several, is that we have taken our learnings, huge learnings, not only from that key project that Tolu Ma'anawe and I met through, but there were some huge learnings that Tāmaki Pāngahira just didn't realize. They were gifted with some gems as to how do you know, they talk about decolonization. They were gifted with how to decolonize your way of knowing and doing, but they just missed it because it just came and it just went. So some of those things, I think the change has really been, it's just amplified the need of why we need to gather more, and like especially with this knowledge house, Kevin, why we need such spaces and forums and thinkers, you know, and work like you know, Vincent, your work, what Hufanga Heako Molotu's doing, and others, you know, those are the thinkers and everyone that contributed to the arts of Moana Oceania, why we need to draw on those that have been doing the thinking and agitating and bringing it to all of our spaces. The change has been, it's just amplified the need for it. And institutions are coming and saying, hey, we want to be culturally diverse and competent. So what we can do is like, this is how you can do it. And we can hold them accountable. Is that a change for the institution? I don't know.
It sounds it, and certainly with Vernon, that seems like quite a significant notch in your belt. I wonder, on behalf of Ezra, I'd like to ask you, Ezra's sleepless in Boston, not in Minneapolis, which is very impressive. But in terms of extending this conversation, I believe you've had some dialogue with Scandinavia, that you've been involved with Norwegian craft in some discussion with around, say, the Sami people. Can you reflect on that and how you felt, what's happened when you've tried to expand the conversation to the other end of the world?
Yeah, well, that's really a project that it's a partnership between Object Space here in Aotearoa and Norwegian Crafts, and they came up with this project which they wanted to include crafting Aotearoa, of which Carl Chitham and I inputted into, but also Langi Mama came in to talk to some of the projects that we're doing, because they were talking about how to decolonize you know, spaces like the craft spaces. And what we found insightful was this: we wanted to take part because we wanted to hear from the Sami community, because we had some Sami makers and thinkers that were part of the panel that we were in, and it was amazing because they're going through the same challenges, you know, and they are doing things, because I think that's what is inspiring with the work that we do, is when we hear other Indigenous communities trying to navigate institutional spaces, but also who are setting up their own spaces and embedding their own ways of knowing and doing, which then kind of, you know, feeds into what we're doing, I think. And it was just an opportunity for us to share, but also to listen and take in what they're doing. So I think what we got out of that was really connecting and with Sami, Indigenous Sami people, but still being frustrated that it's the same challenges and you know, and the same, oh, let's decolonize, let's do this. A lot of talking and a lot of institutions who are part of it. But when you kind of dig deeper, yeah, it's more sort of superficial level. I don't know whether they are really doing it, because some of these institutions that we've been involved in say they want it, and when we come and say this is how you do it, then they want, yeah, then they're not really in.
What would be really in, do you think? What do you look for to see a sign of commitment to decolonization?
Well, I guess when you're open, you know, you go into, we've had a few institutions approach us where they want to engage with our communities, you know, like I guess we can talk to the Cambodian one was quite a key example where we worked with Object Space, and Object Space has a certain way of doing things, and for the Cambodian community, they've never been to Object Space, you know, and the gallery space, and how to mediate, you know, what the gallery Object Space, you know, wanted, but also for us, we were advocating on behalf of the Cambodian communities, and the communities coming into the space where they're wanting to please because they feel indebted to this space because they're giving, you know, a space for the community to come in, and they're displaying works by one of their Cambodian photographers where it's like, yeah, we'll do whatever, we'll accommodate. But for us, it's like, no, you know, this institution wants to genuinely acknowledge you as Cambodians, and you come with however, you know, your cultural protocols, how do we mediate that? And it was challenging because you had them who, they've got certain protocols around their monks, and, you know, for the community to say, oh, we'll just ask our monk to cut it short, you know, because we know it's a gallery and we know that time is, you know, so we're like, no, you tell us culturally what needs to be done to sort of clear things and be culturally appropriate from your side of things. Then we have the conversation with the gallery, and we see where we can mediate. And yeah, there were some things that they were open to, and other things that they stuck to, which that tells us, you know, that you're not ready because you're not willing to, you know, allow the community to say, this is how I want to display my work, or you're not ready to really look after their community when they come into your whale in terms of hosting basic things like knowing there's elders coming and making sure there's chairs, knowing that it's the weather's bad and you make sure that it's covered and our community won't be rained on, things like that. Little simple thing that is telling for when you want to bring the community into your space and look after them.
Thank you, Kesa. And I think maybe it's also looking at it in terms of Moana Oceania, you've got so many cultures which are regularly connecting with each other. So there have to be like corroborees in Australia, ceremonies to try and deal with that, negotiate when the cultures do meet. And there's a lot of welcome and richness and adornment associated with that. And so taking that into other areas of the world potentially can be very fruitful. Vincent, do you want to share with us what's happening in the States with Dakota and Norwegian and quite interesting connections?
Well, it's there. I didn't want to take up any time, but there's a big group of Micronesians who live in a small rural town in West Minnesota. In fact, they make up almost 2/3 of the town's population. This town is long prided itself as the Norwegian American capital of the Midwest. And so, but it's now overrun by Chukis. And we've had we built an outrigger, a sailing outrigger canoe there last year with Dakota communities, the Upper and Lower Sioux Dakota. Dakota are the indigenous people of Minnesota. But in an effort to build community relations, we reached out to the white folks of Norwegian American roots, the settler colonizers, and asked them if they were interested in building boats with us. One of my colleagues in the School of Design got wind of this, and she runs an intense studio workshop during spring break. And last year it was on making, and chose the building of traditional watercraft and the craft of traditional seafaring in Dakota, Micronesian, and Viking maritime history. So her students built a model watercraft from information that a bunch of us shared with them. And I have a link there that references that. And if you also Googled Catalyst 2019, you might find more information on that. But this is also part of a larger project that is looking at Micronesian, Oceanic, American Indian, and watercraft and water-based knowledge, and putting that side by side with art and design and virtual and augmented and mixed reality. So we have this big collaboration going. And so some of that is referenced in that that link that I sent. That link is a link to a photo gallery that's associated with an article in a special issue of a journal called Open Rivers that featured Indigenous relations and waters and knowledge. So it wasn't by accident that I stayed up after midnight to listen to you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vincent.
Well, I think it's also interesting that one of the key thinkers that's come out of Australia recently, Tyson Yunkaporta, who's going to be our first thinker maker next year. His book is called Sand Talk, which is about thinking through sand, which is a medium for coming together, yarning and drawing designs, but also knowing that it's in the performance. It's not something which leaves a lasting trace. So a little like water, but slightly different, but an understanding of this material basis of knowledge can be very empowering. I know we're